The first iron furnace is uncovered by accident. A shovel strikes something harder than soil, and beneath the red earth of central Nigeria, a ring of baked clay appears. Charred, fractured, unmistakably industrial. Around it lie thick slag deposits, heavy with metal residue, fused by heat far beyond a cooking fire. This is not decoration. It is not ritual debris. It is the remains of controlled, repeated iron production, buried for more than 3,000 years. Long before Europe's Iron Age reshaped battlefields and borders, someone here was already mastering fire, ore, and force. This moment forces a reckoning, because for centuries, the Nok were invisible. For much of modern history, ancient Africa was described as technologically late, reactive, and dependent, waiting for metallurgy, statecraft, and warfare to arrive from elsewhere. The Nok culture shatters that assumption at the ground level, not through legend or oral tradition alone, but through clay, carbon, and iron that refuse to fit the old story. The Nok culture occupied what is now central Nigeria, a region of rolling hills, river systems, and iron-rich geology. Archaeological dating places Nok settlements between roughly 1500 BCE and 500 BCE, deep into the period when much of Europe was still transitioning from stone and bronze technologies. These dates are not speculative. They are supported by radiocarbon analysis of charcoal, furnace remains, and habitation layers recovered from multiple sites spread across hundreds of kilometers. What makes the Nok unmistakably real is not a single discovery, but accumulation. Settlements appear repeatedly. Industrial debris is found again and again. Terracotta sculptures, some of the earliest large-scale figurative art south of the Sahara, emerge from the soil with distinct facial features, elaborate hairstyles, and expressions that suggest individual identity rather than abstraction. These are not nomadic traces. They are the markers of sustained communities. And crucially, they are communities organized around production. Archaeologists uncover evidence of structured habitation zones, areas set aside for metallurgy, and signs of agricultural support systems capable of sustaining specialized labor. Ironworking is not something done casually or occasionally. It requires fuel or procurement, technical knowledge, and coordination. This alone places Nok society beyond subsistence survival. Someone planned, someone taught, someone maintained continuity across generations. If you watch this story all the way to the end, you'll see why that furnace matters far beyond archaeology. Because once iron enters a society this early, it reshapes everything: food production, defense, territorial power, and ultimately, how history itself must be written. For decades, Nok artifacts were misunderstood. Early discoveries in the 20th century were dismissed as isolated curiosities or misdated entirely. Terracotta heads appeared on the art market stripped of context, their significance obscured by looting and colonial-era assumptions. Without controlled excavation, the Nok were flattened into aesthetic objects rather than recognized as engineers of an early technological system. That began to change when systematic digs revealed something impossible to ignore: industrial scale, slag heaps too large to be accidental, furnaces too complex to be experimental, tools too standardized to be one-off innovations. The Nok were not borrowing metallurgy casually. They had integrated it. Modern excavation teams, working under increasingly rigorous standards, began mapping Nok sites with precision. Radiocarbon dates converged. Metallurgical analysis confirmed high-temperature smelting capable of separating iron from ore. The timeline held. Again and again, the evidence pointed backward. Earlier than expected. Earlier than comfortable. This created tension not in the ground, but in interpretation. If the Nok were producing iron independently this early, then Africa's technological history could not be framed as derivative. It meant innovation had occurred locally, adapted to environment, resources, and social needs without relying on transmission from the Near East or Mediterranean world. That possibility challenged decades of inherited academic models. The Nok do not leave written records. They do not announce themselves in chronicles or inscriptions. Their history survives in material form: furnaces, tools, settlements, and art shaped by human hands responding to real pressures. That silence has often been mistaken for absence. It is not. The more archaeologists uncover, the clearer the pattern becomes. Nok society was not a fleeting experiment. It endured for centuries. It adapted. It mastered one of the most consequential technologies in human history at a time when many regions of the world had not yet done so. And iron, once mastered, does not remain neutral for long. What begins as buried slag and broken furnaces will soon force a deeper question, not just of when Africans learned to work iron, but what iron allowed them to do with power, protection, and survival in a world that was already competitive and violent. The Nok were not waiting for history to arrive. They were already forging it. The furnaces are not crude pits or accidental burn marks. They are engineered. Clay walls are deliberately shaped to withstand repeated exposure to extreme heat. Air channels are positioned precisely. Tuyères, ceramic pipes designed to funnel oxygen, are found broken and discarded nearby, evidence of sustained use rather than experimentation. Around them, slag accumulates in dense layers, the unmistakable waste product of iron smelting. This is controlled metallurgy, not chance discovery. Radiocarbon dating places many of these furnaces firmly between 1000 BCE and 500 BCE, with some evidence pushing earlier still. That matters because it places Nok ironworking centuries before iron becomes widespread in much of Europe. At the same moment when many European societies are still dependent on bronze or stone tools, Nok metalworkers are already solving the hardest problem of early metallurgy: sustaining temperatures high enough to separate iron from its ore. Iron does not yield easily. Unlike copper or bronze, it requires far greater heat and careful oxygen control. This demands not only technical knowledge, but systems, fuel production, charcoal management, ore sourcing, and skilled labor passed down over time. Nok ironworking is not a single breakthrough. It is an infrastructure. What makes this even more significant is what is missing. There is no archaeological evidence of transitional copper or bronze industries leading into Nok iron production, no imported Near Eastern furnaces, no diffusion trail linking Nok technology to Mediterranean metallurgy. Instead, the Nok appear to leap directly into ironworking, developing techniques adapted to local materials and environmental conditions. This challenges one of the oldest assumptions in technological history: that iron knowledge must have traveled outward from a single Eurasian origin. Nok metallurgy suggests something else entirely: that ironworking may have emerged independently in West Africa, driven by necessity, experimentation, and local problem-solving rather than external instruction. Metallurgical analysis of Nok slag reveals consistency in smelting processes. The chemical signatures show deliberate reduction techniques, not accidental iron bloom formation. These metalworkers understood how to manipulate carbon content, airflow, and furnace structure to produce usable iron repeatedly. This is knowledge refined over generations, not stumbled upon once. Ironworking reshapes labor itself. Smelting is dangerous, time-consuming, and specialized. It requires coordination between miners, charcoal producers, furnace operators, and tool makers. Nok society must therefore support specialization. People who are not farming full-time, but producing tools for others. This implies surplus, planning, and social organization capable of sustaining complex production chains. The presence of iron also changes agriculture. Iron tools last longer, cut deeper, and clear land more efficiently than stone alternatives. Fields expand, food production stabilizes, population density increases. Iron is not only a military or industrial advantage, it is an economic one that feeds every other aspect of society. Crucially, this technology does not appear isolated to a single site. Furnaces and slag deposits are found across a wide Nok region, suggesting shared knowledge rather than guarded secrets. Ironworking becomes cultural, not individual. It spreads within the society, standardized enough to be recognizable archaeologically centuries later. Later African iron traditions show striking parallels. Furnace designs, smelting practices, and tool forms echo Nok methods, suggesting continuity rather than coincidence. While Nok society itself eventually fades from the archaeological record, its technological legacy does not vanish. It diffuses. This forces a reframing of Africa's Iron Age. Nok ironworking is not an outlier waiting to be explained away. It is evidence that Africa participated in one of humanity's most transformative technological revolutions on its own terms, at its own pace, and possibly earlier than many regions long considered the default innovators. Iron changes societies wherever it appears. It accelerates production, sharpens conflict, and redefines power. The Nok did not merely possess iron, they mastered it, early, deliberately, and independently. And once iron exists in a society like this, it does not remain confined to tools or fields for long. It reshapes how people protect themselves, assert dominance, and survive competition in a crowded landscape. The furnace was only the beginning. Iron does not stay in the ground once it is mastered. It moves into hands, into daily life, and inevitably into conflict. For the Nok, iron changes the balance between vulnerability and control in ways that stone never could. Archaeological finds from Nok sites include iron spearheads, blades, and cutting tools that could shift roles instantly. From hunting implements to weapons, these objects are not ceremonial. They show wear. Edges are chipped, sharpened, reused. Iron survives impact in ways stone cannot. It bends before it breaks. It can be reforged, reshaped, improved. In a landscape where survival depends on readiness, that matters. Before iron, stone tools dominate. They are effective but fragile, labor-intensive to produce, and limited in form. Bronze, where available elsewhere, requires long-distance trade for tin and copper. Iron removes that dependency. Ore exists locally. Production can be scaled. Repairs are possible. Control becomes control over resilience. For Nok communities, this shift is profound. Iron spearheads penetrate deeper. Iron blades retain edges longer. Wooden shields, reinforced with iron fittings, last through repeated impacts. A hunter armed with iron is more effective. A defender armed with iron is harder to dislodge. Even without standing armies, the presence of iron alters the calculus of confrontation. This does not mean the Nok lived in constant war, but it does mean they lived prepared. Iron tools allow faster land clearing, larger harvests, and denser populations. Density brings competition, brings conflict. In such conditions, the ability to arm oneself quickly and reliably becomes a form of insurance. Iron also equalizes and stratifies at the same time. Those with access to metal workers gain advantage. Communities that control production gain leverage. Nok settlements with iron-working capability are no longer passive participants in regional dynamics. They can defend territory, deter encroachment, and project strength when necessary. The evidence suggests this advantage was understood. Iron objects appear in contexts associated with protection and authority. Blades are found near habitation centers, not just peripheral hunting zones. This placement implies readiness, not occasional use. Iron was integrated into the rhythms of settlement life. Ironworking also introduces maintenance culture. Weapons require care. Edges must be maintained. Damage must be assessed and corrected. This creates roles beyond the battlefield. Craftsmen who understand stress, impact, and durability. Knowledge circulates, techniques improve. Over time, this produces not just better tools, but better systems of defense. For neighboring communities without comparable metallurgy, the difference is immediate. Stone fractures where iron holds. Wooden weapons fail against iron-tipped spears. Defensive structures face new pressures. Iron does not guarantee victory, but it raises the cost of aggression. That alone can reshape regional behavior. What matters most is timing. Knock iron weapons appear centuries before similar technologies become widespread in Europe. At a moment when iron is still rare or emerging elsewhere, knock communities already understand how to integrate it into survival strategies. This places them ahead of a curve that global history often assumes Africa never reached independently. Iron also changes perception. A society capable of producing metal inspires caution. Knowledge travels faster than artifacts. Stories of harder blades and durable tools spread along trade routes and migration paths. Reputation becomes deterrence. The Nok do not leave fortresses or written battle accounts. Their warfare, if and when it occurs, leaves subtler traces. But iron does not lie. Its presence alone signals preparedness. It tells us these communities were not technologically exposed, not easily overrun, not waiting for protection to arrive from elsewhere. Iron allowed the Nok to shape their environment and defend their place within it. It turned settlements into strongholds of capability rather than vulnerability, and in doing so, it laid the groundwork for patterns of power that would echo long after the Nok themselves faded from view. Once iron enters the hands of a society this early, it stops being a tool alone. It becomes an advantage. Iron does not remain confined to the people who first master it. Once production stabilizes and techniques become reliable, knowledge begins to travel, quietly at first, then irreversibly. In West Africa, the Nok do not exist in isolation. Their settlements sit along corridors of movement that connect forest zones to the Sahel, routes shaped by rivers, grazing paths, and seasonal migration. Along these routes, ideas move faster than objects. Archaeological patterns show this clearly. Centuries after the earliest Nok furnaces fall silent, ironworking appears across wide regions of West Africa with striking similarities in method and design. Furnaces share structural features. Slag composition reflects comparable reduction techniques. Tool forms echo earlier Nok examples. This is not replication by coincidence. It is inheritance. The spread does not require conquest or empire in the traditional sense. It moves through contact, intermarriage, migration, apprenticeship, and trade. A skilled metalworker does not need to transport furnaces to change a region. They carry technique in memory and practice. They teach by doing. Over time, entire communities adopt ironworking not as an imported novelty, but as a local craft rooted in shared knowledge. This continuity matters because it reshapes how African technological history must be understood. Ironworking in later West African societies does not emerge suddenly or mysteriously. It rests on foundations laid centuries earlier. Nok metallurgy becomes a starting point, not a dead end. As iron spreads, it transforms societies differently depending on environment. In savanna regions, iron tools accelerate agriculture and herding. In forest zones, iron axes open land previously inaccessible. In both, weapons evolve alongside tools, reinforcing the link between production and protection. Iron enables expansion without dependence on distant trade networks. Autonomy increases. Over time, this autonomy feeds the rise of complex societies and kingdoms. While direct political continuity between the Nok and later states cannot be traced cleanly, technological continuity can. The knowledge that iron can be produced locally, at scale, and adapted to different needs becomes embedded in cultural practice. Later, West African polities inherit this advantage long before external contact reshapes the region. Trade routes amplify the effect. Iron tools become exchange goods. Metalworking expertise becomes portable capital. Communities that control iron production gain influence, not just militarily, but economically. Iron binds regions together through dependency and exchange, reinforcing networks that predate and outlast any single culture. Importantly, this diffusion is not passive. Knock ironworking does not simply spread because it exists. It spreads because it works. It solves problems, clearing land, producing food, defending settlements, that matter everywhere. Technologies that fail do not travel far. Iron travels far because it delivers advantage. This long arc of influence disrupts a familiar narrative. Too often, African technological history is framed as episodic, disconnected, or reactive. The knock reveals something else. Deep time continuity, a chain of knowledge stretching across centuries, adapting but not disappearing, shaping entire regions long before global trade or colonial intrusion. By the time European contact expands in later centuries, West Africa is not encountering iron for the first time. It has lived with it for generations. It has refined it, adapted it, and integrated it into social systems. External iron does not introduce metallurgy. It competes with an existing tradition. The knock therefore occupy a pivotal place in this story, not because they built an empire that endured in name, but because they introduced a technological shift whose consequences outlived them. Their iron becomes the quiet infrastructure of later power, unseen, uncelebrated, but foundational. Local innovation becomes regional transformation. What began as furnaces buried beneath Nigerian soil becomes a technological lineage spanning West Africa, reshaping how societies farm, fight, and endure. Iron does not announce its legacy loudly. It reveals it slowly in what survives. By the time historians begin charting the global Iron Age, the map is already skewed. Europe's timeline is treated as the standard. Its transitions from bronze to iron carefully periodized, its weapons and wars framed as the turning points of history. Africa, when mentioned at all, is placed on the receiving end of that story, assumed to have acquired metallurgy late, externally, and unevenly. The knock force a correction. Their ironworking does not fit the old model. It is too early, too widespread, too technically coherent. Radiocarbon dates place knock furnaces centuries before iron becomes dominant across much of Europe. Metallurgical analysis shows controlled reduction techniques, not crude experimentation. The absence of precursor bronze industries suggests independent problem-solving rather than imitation. In short, the knock do not look like recipients of technology. They look like originators. This realization has consequences far beyond West Africa. If ironworking emerges independently in knock society, then the Iron Age is not a single wave radiating outward from Eurasia. It is a convergence. Multiple regions, facing similar pressures, arriving at similar solutions through different paths. Human ingenuity is not linear. It is parallel. That reframing challenges more than dates. It challenges hierarchy. For generations, technological firsts have been used to rank civilizations implicitly, to suggest who leads and who follows, who innovates and who waits. Knock iron dissolves that structure. It shows that ancient Africans were not waiting for metallurgy to arrive. They were already transforming their world with it. Modern scholarship has begun to reflect this shift, though unevenly. Archaeologists increasingly recognize Africa as a center of early technological innovation rather than a peripheral zone. Debates now focus not on whether African ironworking was independent, but how many times and where it emerged. Knock stands as one of the strongest, clearest cases. What makes this reassessment difficult is not lack of evidence, but legacy. Colonial-era assumptions shaped which sites were excavated, which questions were asked, and which answers were considered plausible. African technological achievements were often treated as anomalies requiring external explanation. Knock iron refuses that framing. It does not need rescuing by diffusion theories. It stands on its own. Rewriting this history does not diminish Europe's Iron Age. It contextualizes it. It places European developments alongside African, Near Eastern, and Asian innovations as part of a broader human pattern. Societies responding creatively to environmental, economic, and competitive pressures using the resources at hand. And iron, more than almost any other technology, reveals that pattern clearly. Wherever it appears early, societies change rapidly. Agriculture intensifies, tools become durable, defense becomes scalable, power consolidates. The NOC experienced these shifts on their own timeline, independent of Mediterranean influence, long before the world was connected by global exchange. This matters today because history shapes perception. When Africa's past is flattened or delayed, its present is misread. The NOC remind us that African societies have long been sites of invention, adaptation, and strategic advantage. Their absence from popular history is not evidence of insignificance. It is evidence of erasure. The African empire that used iron weapons centuries before Europe does not announce itself through conquest narratives or written chronicles. It announces itself through slag, furnaces, tools, and continuity. Through the quiet persistence of technology that worked. Iron does not care about myths of progress. It records only who learned to master it, and when. And long before iron reshaped European battlefields, it was already being forged, wielded, and understood in the heart of West Africa by people history is only now beginning to fully see.